Beginning of the research tapas for the semester. I have another one scheduled in February. Chris Franklin's going to be talking about the divide between science and commerce. And then I'm in negotiations with 2 faculty members, topics to be determined. And then Gordon Jensen will be talking about approaching foundations in May. And then how many people have heard about Career Matters? Oh, you haven't? Yeah. Oh, we're going to start another series.
Second time, yeah.
Same format called Career Matters. Now, we test marketed that name, and it test marketed very well. And we're going to be talking about, I have 4 of them lined up next month. The Impact Factor, Gary Ward, Setting Up Collaborations, Do's and Don'ts by David Warshaw, H, Index and Alternative Measures by Chris Houston, and then How to Effectively Chair a Committee. I'm not sure I'm the best person to do that, but I volunteer to do that. So that's going to be a series where we're going to talk about what I'd like to think about as transferable work skills that, or things, no matter what you end up doing, you would need to know those sorts of things. Or they matter to your career, whereas the other one is more of things that matter in science. And today's topic is how to respond to reviewers. Now, I'm reminded that this is like medicine. There is evidence, and then there's expert opinion. And since there's no evidence to speak of, you're going to get a big dose of expert opinion. Oops, is it going to work? No. It's not going to work. Great. So much for hot tech. Nothing's going to work. Uh-oh. Where's my man? He disappeared. Yeah, I know. Oh, there we go. Maybe that was it. Okay. Most scientists regard the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. And this is really what we're talking about. This is a gauntlet you have to run to get anything accepted these days. And if you can't learn how to navigate that, you're in trouble. And a friend of mine likes to say that the most important thing we teach our trainees is how to deal with rejection. So why peer review dates back to 1731 at the Society of Edinburgh. It's really sort of a consensus building process about whether this is worthy or not. One thought is it detects plagiarism and fraud. That's not always the case, but that's the idea. And then lastly, and probably the most important thing, is the journals are trying to publish the best quality papers, and we're all trying to do the best quality science. Now, believe it or not, I was looking for a diagram of how the system works and sort of a computer logic thing, and this was about the best I came up with. It doesn't really capture it, but you send in a paper, the editor decides whether or not it gets sent out in some journals, others not. It goes to 3 so-called experts, and then you get feedback to the editor. The editor kind of makes a decision, or not, depending on the case, and then it goes back to the reviewer, and then the whole thing goes around and around a few times. Now, I picked up these next 2 slides from Elsevier, which is one of the big gorillas in publishing, and they talk about, just to give you the idea of the magnitude of this, you've got in their suite of journals, you've got 7,000 editors, 70,000 editorial board members, 500,000 reviewers, okay? And they're not all created equal. Elsevier goes on and says that the editors and reviewers are the most precious resource of a journal. And you also have to remember they're not professional journal staff. They tend to be scientists like us, although there are journals where they do have professional editors. And then they're busy, they're unpaid, and nowadays everybody's working hard. So the system is right up to the rails. I like this. It comes from one of the radiology journals. Number of reviewers over a 5-year span, and the classic bell-shaped curve. Most of the reviewers are mainstream, but at each end, you've got the zealots and the pushovers. They like everything you do. At the other end, you've got the motors who are competitors of yours, and people who are outright nasty and assassins. Okay? And that's just life. And if you think about it from an odds point of view, this is where the famous reviewer number 3 comes from. 2 of them love it, 1 hates it. And that comes from down here at this end. Who are the reviewers? I like this cartoon. The professor gets a paper, gives it to the postdoc. The postdoc passes the PhD student. PhD student passes it to the master's student, who then is like, what the hell's going on? Or never seen a paper in their life. And this happens. And we all do it because we want our trainees to learn, but we have to then take responsibility. Now, in doing this talk, I came across this website. It's called Your Paper Sucks. And this is the name of the website. I'm not making this up. And it's full of comments from reviewers, real comments. Such a prestigious journal can surely make better use of limited space. I've used this one. I'm really looking forward to reading this manuscript. However, the enthusiasm soon waned. This is from the editor to the author. We invited 18 reviewers, and only 1 agreed, and then we never got the reviews back, so we're giving your paper back. And then this is straightforward. You like the next one. Overall, this manuscript is a waste of time. And that was it. That's the only comment from that reviewer. What's worse is when you don't get any comments from them. They're not even going to brace themselves to write it. Now, a good reviewer is one that articulates strengths and also points out limitations. But nevertheless, even though it was well received, the tone of everything is negative, and that's something you got to learn to kind of interpret, if you will. So the first thing you need to do is get very mad, yell. I have a friend of mine who writes clever, scathing rebuttals as a cathartic approach. Most people recommend to put it away for a few days at least to calm down. And then you take a breath, and my approach is, I'm going to get even. I'm going to show this guy or gal what's going on here. Next problem that I've had in the past is interpret what the editor is trying to tell you, which is, if you're not into this in a big way, can sometimes be a little opaque. So the editor can accept with minor revisions, revise and do not re-review, reject. They've got a lot of different things, and you've got to interpret what they've said. Now, I have never had a paper accept as is, never. Okay. Have you, any of you guys? You have, okay, I have not. The best I ever did was science when they asked me 3 really trivial questions and still wrote a thing back to me that if it wasn't put together right, they were going to dump it. Okay. This is from one of the IEEE journals that it was clear, reject, a major rewrite is required, encourage resubmission at a later date, not sufficient quality novelty to be published, is seriously flawed, and this is a different kind of thing. We never want to see this paper again. So here's rejection. I'm really sorry we cannot be more positive. Hope that you'll find the referee's comments helpful. Our review is complete. I regret to say we've decided against publishing in Science. We hope you fly our airline again. This is what I call the bed bug or cockroach letter, because it looks surprisingly similar to what you get from United Airlines when things don't go well. Ask that you allow us another opportunity to serve you as we consider it our privilege to have you aboard. Okay, this is a cockroach letter. We really like you. We're sorry you had a bad time. Please come back and see us again. Okay. Works in industry, why not in science? This one is saying, based on the reviews, we're not able to accept this manuscript for publication, although we would be willing to review again a much revised version. So they learned, and this happened to me when they changed the way these things were written from reject or accept, because they would say, okay, we'll do it again, but then the authors would blow them off. So then they started using language like this. Okay. And to make it clear that if you don't toe the line, this is not going to get published, or at least leave the editor out. You have to read in between the lines. As you can see below, all three reviewers liked your study quite a lot, although two of them raised some issues. I suspect they won't be too difficult to address. But you also have to think that what he's thinking, the editor, although it will require some thought and effort. Assuming you address these satisfactory manner, final decision without re-review. That's not a promise, it's my expectation. So here's a danger. You get one of these, and then you don't do a very good job of revising it. Then what happens? It could get rejected, and your reputation is going to start to suffer as a result. Because there's a fair bit, in my opinion and experience, where reputation comes to play. You got to read these carefully. What do they say? You may not like it, but where they write. Show the reviews to somebody else because you get to this. They just called your baby ugly. Okay, so you got to get somebody else to see if they see the same thing. Organize it under common themes. Decide what to do for each, and then start working on this. Even if you just start with the easy stuff to get yourself going. And don't be surprised. I've had papers where my response to the reviews is longer than the discussion of the paper. I mean, you got infinite number of pages, unlike a grant, so use them. Wear them down. Read the instructions. You need to be specific, point by point. Journals have rules about this. You need to follow. Okay. And until you've done this a few times, you don't get it. I used to try to group them all together, you know, and I ended up, I got a letter to the editor, or I'm responding. I've done a great job with 1 and 2, but 3, I'm not buying it. And we're not going to do it, but I say it in a nice way. So I give the editor a preview of what he's going to see. And then each reviewer gets their own thing. Because as a reviewer, I get it back. I don't care what the other. I used to care what the other reviewers did to kind of calibrate myself. Now I don't care. I just, did they think I was brilliant, and did they respond to me? Because if they didn't, I'm going to dump on them. Now, this is where the toady concept comes in. Yeah, toady. I find that no one understands this word. You cannot be too toady. Toady is a person who behaves obsequiously to somebody important. Sycophant, bootlicker, groveler, fawn. There's some other really nasty words that I won't use. Okay. I find it really works well to be very toady. Not totally hopelessly, so you're embarrassed, but more toady than not. Try to agree even when you don't. There's some ways to do that. Be conversational. I'll try to converse with them and engage in a conversation. And by all means, be nice. What you want to say is the experiment will take forever. So what you do say is the suggested experiment is interesting and would provide additional information about, but we feel this falls outside of the scope of the study, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then you can read the rest of these. You didn't even read what we wrote. We did not intend to indicate, or what I typically do is, I'm so sorry you didn't get it. And maybe we weren't clear, but here it is. It's really panel 4. And we didn't explain it well enough, even though you did. So here's one. This is an interesting, well paper, and you can read the rest of this, but this is a reviewer that's trying to help you. You may not like it, but they're trying to help you. Now, this person responded, "Thank you very much for your kind words. We are delighted to hear. Okay, we are grateful for the time and energy." Okay, well, that's getting the bovine excrement meter, kind of pegging it towards the top. But you know, you're being nice back. They can't get mad at that. Okay? And it depends on the day that the reviewer gets it back. Because remember, I accepted the review, I got some weeks to do it, but when it comes back in revision, it just drops you out of the sky, and it may be a really bad time for me, or I'm having a bad day, or whatever. Okay. So it pays to be nice. Here's another example. The reviewer is absolutely correct. Okay, whether they worked or not doesn't matter. Decide what to change. You must address all the comments. Address does not always mean change, but sometimes it's a conversation with the reviewer. Always change anything technical. Always change references. They're often telling you the reference you didn't cite was theirs or a friend of theirs. Change anything that yielded I don't understand. If they didn't get it, the readers may not get it. Always change anything mentioned by more than 2 reviewers, because the editor will go back and look at that. The editor will often tell you in their letter that there was something that many of the reviewers, 2 of the 3 reviewers pointed out, because that's what they focus on, because they're looking for consensus. When to say no. When they make no sense. When they do take too much money and are beyond the scope. Now, I've hidden behind that many times, but that means I have to write my introduction to the paper very carefully. So those last couple of sentences, the purpose of this study is to, whatever that is, choose your words very carefully, because you can go back and often hide behind that. It's just beyond the scope of what we were trying to do, okay? Or that would be another study in by itself. And that's a very common occurrence in my experience. We appreciate the recommendations and consider the approach. However, for the following reasons, we chose not to. Oh yeah, we had thought about it, even if you hadn't. I had thought about it, but we decided not to, because any idiot would know that that doesn't work. Okay. Remember, they always ask you for more. So sometimes there's a strategy of just not giving them everything, knowing that they're going to ask for it in review. I like to be very direct. Each comment with a direct answer. Be very direct. Be sure you answer the question they're asking you. I like to put in yes, no, I've done that. What about I go, yes, that's it, because that's what he asked. Or I started off with agreed. Communicating it, you have to write a letter to the editor. That has to be a well-crafted manuscript, because they look at that, particularly if they're going to decide to accept it without sending it back to the reviewers. And then you write responses to each reviewer, okay? And you start with those, and then you craft this last. Don't make the referees work. Make sure that you put in what they asked you, repeat their comment, indicate where it was, where it is now. I like to do red line versions of the manuscript so they can see how many changes I've made. I sometimes just look at it. If there are not a lot of red ink in there, I know that I'm going to be in for a fight with the author. Here's an example: reply, reply. Okay, and it's now found on this page and that page. Okay. In this example, we agree with the reviewer and added, we agree with the reviewer. I'll start it off with agreed, agreed, yes. Very direct. What did I change? Where is it? This is one where they changed the words in the manuscript and then repeated it in the response to the reviewer. Nice touch. I like this one. I came across it in getting this together. Comment, page 14. I would have said, agreed, we have added the text, and then here's the change in the manuscript. Very clear to the reviewer what you did. Okay? And the more yes, yes, change, here's what I did, the better, at least again in my experience, the better it goes. Once in a while, I'll appeal to the editor. I don't do this very often. I know people will do it every time. Okay? Editors will tell me that their phone rings off the hook, and they're complaining about everything. But if you do, stick to the science, don't whine, and treat them as a colleague, not your enemy. You know, they're the messengers sometimes. Don't kill the messenger. They're going to decide the end of the day if it gets in. Say, they didn't get this right. This is, whatever it is. But I have done this a few times. Lastly, there's always the Einstein Way. He had a paper he put in on gravitational waves and physical reviews. And he wrote to the editor, "Dear sir, we, Mr. Rosen and I, have sent you our manuscript for publication and not authorized you to show it to specialists before it was printed. I see no reason to address in any case erroneous comments from your anonymous expert. On the basis of this incident, I prefer to publish the paper elsewhere." Now, he thought he was a famous guy. Why would you have to send his stuff out for review? It turned out that the guy was correct, and he recognized that. At least he was sharp enough to send it to a different journal. All right. I went over a few minutes, I apologize.
So how do you handle it when a reviewer just clearly didn't read the paper properly and wrote something the opposite of what you have in there? How do you nicely tell them that they need to read the paper again?
You don't. What you have to do is absolutely refrain from doing or saying in any way, shape, or form that it would be interpreted that way. Yeah. What you have to say is you have to take the blame on yourself. That's if you want that paper published in that journal. Now, what you do in your letter to the editor is in a very nice way, you say that reviewer number 3, I don't know what to tell you. I sometimes say something like, this is astonishing to me. I'm sure this is normally a very wonderful person, but on this occasion, it's pretty clear they didn't read it. Now, nevertheless, we have still tried to appease them and make some changes. Because remember, the editor has to make nice to the reviewers because the editor has to count on people to review for them and do it in a timely fashion. And that's becoming a problem. So what you have to do is as soon as you get, that's why you have to put it away. And then you come back and say, okay, maybe he's right. Maybe this does suck. So what did I do wrong and how, and then you start having a conversation. And that's where I get into a conversation and tell them what they're doing. I find that helps. Like you talk, like you're in a seminar or you're sitting here talking to each other. I use that kind of tone where I can. Because I want to engage them a little bit. Again, I'm moving, on the excrement meter, I'm getting kind of high up there, but, like I said, it helps.
So if that happens to me, I would think my writing was clear to me,
right,
but not clear enough to reviewers. I would rewrite it.
Well, then what I would look for, do all 3 reviewers say the same thing? And I will write to so remember, as a reviewer, I have a section that I fill in that's anonymous from me to the editor. And I could say whatever the hell I want to say there. And I normally don't. I normally say my issues with this paper I've put in my review. If I have a problem with the paper I'm reviewing and I can't, the English is poor, I'll tell them. But I'll also tell the editor that the English in this particular manuscript is really not very good, and it needs some work. I think it's an interesting paper, but in its present form, it's not gonna. And of course, the editor is protecting the integrity of the journal. They want papers that will get cited, and they want papers that people will read. And if you start reading a paper, that's why you have to have other people. If English is not your native tongue, then you've got to have other people. Even when it is, like in my case, my wife says I can't speak English either. Well, I always try to get people. Yeah.
Is there a way that you can respond to the editor to get him or her to make the decision instead of kind of pushing it back to the reviewers?
You do that by nailing it every time. at least my approach over the last 20, 30 years is when I get now that I've learned and I've been on the other side, is I don't care what the editor said to me. I will go through that with a fine-tooth comb. I will respond to everything the best I can. I will try to do everything that they have asked me to do. And I will do it in a very complete, thorough, rigorous fashion. And the editors can tell that.
So how often does it still go back to the reviewer anyway?
Depends on the journal, depends on the associate editor. Some journals, depends on you. So for instance, that's why you build a reputation. They know you're a careful worker. They know your reputation. The editor's a friend of yours. And there I'm even more careful about it because I don't want to impose on that friendship. I may need it. So I'm going to save that shit for another day. But I'm going to respond back as completely thoroughly and be responsive. This is true of grants when you put them back in. You want the reviewers to say, oh my, wow, this is really something. They were responsive.
May I speak as an editor for a moment?
I would hope.
Because the question that you raise is when I receive a manuscript and send it out and the reviews come back, I don't want to have to send it back out to the reviewers because, as Charlie said, they're really busy people. And in fact, on our journal, when they send in their review, there's a checkbox. I will look at a revision or I will not. And oftentimes I will not look at it again. They're too busy. They don't want to see it. So I'm looking for what Charlie said. Did they really address the comments of the reviewer and did it make it a better manuscript? And then I have to make the decision. But I don't like to have to send it back to the reviewers unless there are major experimental issues that needed to be addressed and the reviewer wants to see it again. But oftentimes, like you said.
Now, I've never been an editor. I never wanted to be one. I'm not the right phenotype to be an editor. But when they check the box, I want to see it back, have you ignored that and not send it back?
No, if they ask to see it back, I'll send it.
Send it back.
Yeah, we'll send it back. I mean, the important thing for me as an editor when I get the revised manuscript, or when I get the comments from the reviewers, I'll send it back to the authors and say, you want to pay attention, obviously, point by point to what the reviewer said. Then I'll say, especially, look at point number 2 from review 2. You need to do this. And I'll say the revised version needs new experiments, because oftentimes if you don't come right out and say that, they'll send back a revised version and I'll get it 2 days later. I'm like, what? This has to be a mistake. And they didn't do any of the experiments. So I'll tell them right up front, if you send it back without doing further experiments, it will be rejected.
Yeah.
Because they try to get away, as much as they can. And I'll say, oftentimes bullet points, you also need to do this, 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 and this. So I try to really lay it out very clearly so they know what's required. No, I mean, you don't get that all the time from journals, but I try to do that to let them know what they need to do.
They didn't way back when. They didn't do that. Now they do, and more you see it. And some of this too is, there's secret communication between the reviewer and the editor about something, and because it comes up in the letter and you go, oh, they must have said something. There have been times when I don't quite get it, and I knew the editor. I'll call him up and I'll say, "Hey, Stan, this looks pretty good, but there's this one part that the editor told me I had to look at, but I don't quite get it. Was there something in their comments back to you as an editor that maybe can help me frame my response a little bit?" And I've had the editors, because now I'm engaging the editor on my side too. It's a tricky business.
Sounds like it.
It's very tricky. And there's a lot of nuance to it that you don't think of when you first start off in the biz that you don't realize. And it takes, that's why hanging around people who've been doing it for a while so that they can So you learn the craft of dealing with this is not trivial. And I don't, have you seen a lot of authors trying to blow it off more recently than in the past?
What I see with the explosion of online predatory journals is if we tell them you need to do this and this, we never see it again. But then I track it, so I keep a list of all those manuscripts, and then 6 months later I'll do a search on it, and it will show up somewhere else without the experiments done invariably.
Right.
That's what usually happens. Is they just aren't going to be
They just
bothered.
said, I'm not going to do it.
They're not going to do it.
I sort of depend, the review process, when it really works well, is when the reviewer points something out and you go, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then you go off and do it, and it's like, wow, he's right, she's right. And then you improve that's where it really works. Not very often, but it does happen. At least, but thorough.
And can I make one more comment?
Sure.
Even before it, you end up with the reviewer's comments. I really recommend that when you're writing the paper, that you look up the instructions for authors. Sounds simple. Probably 75% of the manuscripts that when I send back with the reviewer's comments, I say, and also you need to follow journal formats for references and order and figures, and people don't do it. They don't look at instructions for authors. Now, some journals, as you've seen some of the big ones now, Journal of Cell Biology, they'll take any format. They don't care. You send them whatever format you want. If they accept the paper, they'll reformat it.
Right.
We haven't gone to that yet, so we do ask that the authors follow the instructions for authors, and they usually quite often
like the
don't.
New England Journal, you'll get it back, it's accepted, and then they hand it over to their copyright the editors, and then they start rewriting it for you, which is a hair-raising experience because they usually give you like 24 hours.
Yeah.
Well, it's the New England Journal, so you can get away with that kind of stuff. But it's suddenly you get, I got 48 hours to make all these changes, and then they hand it to an editor that's changed every which to that, and ifs, the thens, and God knows what. And it's, they have very strict rules. You can only have one figure, 2 tables, and that's it. And so then they get after you about all kinds of things. So I think authors are just saying, well, they're all going to do that to me, so I'll try to get it accepted and then mess with it afterwards. Again, you're taking risks when you do that.
So we wrote a paper a long time ago, and it got back mixed reviews. And we took an intermediate step. We responded to the editor and said, this is how we plan to address these uneven comments. So we did that because we weren't sure if, based on what we could do, if it would ultimately be accepted or rejected. And so it worked out that time.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if taking that sort of intermediate step would be
I've done it on the phone.
Would it damage reputation a little bit to make the editor do a little more work?
That's why I do it on the phone, if I can. I'm old school, so I'd call them up and I say, I'm planning, we're going to do this, this, and this, but we're not doing that. You'd be okay with that? Well, it depends what you say, but yeah, it could be. That's usually what they'll tell you. But yeah, it is one way to do it, particularly if you find the reviews a little opaque or a little hard to understand exactly what it is they're trying to tell you. You have to sometimes read in between the lines a little bit on that.
So pretty naive question. So about pre-submission. And so we cannot submit one manuscript to 2 journals. That's good, not good. But how about for pre-submission? Is this still considered as is this rule also applied to pre-submission?
Well, yeah, there's mixed review. I mean, I've never done the pre-submission business. I was reading about it last night, and some journals were doing it now don't want it. So they've had some mixed results, and they're still thinking about it. I do know there was one paper I know, it's a long story, but they did actually submit it to 2 different journals simultaneously. And what's interesting is it was eventually published in the Science, using a format that's normally found in this other journal, which I found bizarre. I think I know why, but again, it's one of those odd things that you don't hear about too much, but it is definitely bad. Don't do that. It's fraud, if you will. Because often when you submit to the journal, they ask you, and they say you can't do that, and is this original or whatever. There are people that will submit a paper to a journal, get it published, and then change it a little bit, and then submit it to another journal and get it published. Yeah, there's been some fraud cases of that. The best one was some guy who went to obscure journals, took a paper, changed the title, just took it, plagiarized, and then sent it to another obscure journal. He published over 100 papers that way. But you see everything. Any crazy behavior that you can imagine, you see over a period of time. Corey, you have a point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's, my experience is, well, it's an observation more than it's a change, a philosophical change over the years. It used to be in the old days that editors were actually experts in the field, and they would oftentimes get reviewers' comments back, and there may be a few negatives, there may be a few comments, but the editor had the ability and the experience and the depth and breadth of knowledge to say, this paper should be published, regardless of what the reviewer said. And that used to be a standard approach for many old-fashioned, when I first started out as a student, as a faculty member and postdoc. That has gradually kind of changed, particularly in the top-tier journals, the science, the nature of these journals. Don't forget that they're actually in it for the business. They're in it to make money. They don't give two hoots to hell what your paper is about. They're in it to make money. And so they send out these section editors. So for example, in science, nature, the top tier journals, there will be these section editors. And they're actually the ones who get the papers that you have submitted. And they will be the ones decide whether or not it's going to go out for publishing or for review. And many of those section editors spend a vast amount of their time going to scientific meetings and connecting and interacting and hearing seminars and hearing the presentations. And then they, based on those meetings and interactions, decide what is novel and what is important. And that is a step that you can't get by unless you can bludgeon the bejesus out of them. I've never been able to do that. Mercedes does it all the time. That you can get them to then consider it further. And so your paper may be excellent, may be really, really good, but unless that journal thinks it's going to attract a lot of readership, going to help them with their subscriptions, going to make more money, it's not going to be published. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind with those top tier kinds of journals. The middle tier, the lower, right under those, will be more amenable to sending it out for review and then getting to the process that Charlie describes. I'm saying don't forget that much of what you're getting into when you try to publish in these top tier journals is the politics of money, not necessarily the politics of good science.
Well, then there's also politics of science, which is pretty heinous. I mean, the New England Journal happened to know the editor pretty well. And the New England Journal, and when you listen to him talk about the journal, it's all about his impact factor. And what they do is they meet every week in Harvard. The journal office is in the medical library, right in the campus at Harvard. And all the section editors come in and they discuss the papers that they've set up for review, whatever. And I swear to God, the biggest criteria they have for a paper in the New England Journal is, what are the odds that this is going to be mentioned on the evening news or in the New York Times or the Boston Globe or whatever? That irregardless of whether the study was all that compelling, because some of the ones I've reviewed for them, it's like, really, I knew there was one that came through. I knew it was going to get accepted. I just knew, because I knew the editor well enough to know that, yeah, he's going to want this accepted. Or another one that came through, and you could just see it was about chitinase, which comes from insects. So now you can see the headlines in the newspaper. Insect protein causes asthma. Now, the paper was not all that compelling when you actually looked at the data, but you could see what the headlines were. And so there's another, so there's citations, their impact factor, which then relate, that's what they hide behind, because behind that is the money. And their job as an editor, because if their journal starts, the impact factor citations start going down, their job's on. And then, you know, I mean, if you want to hear some really heinous things, you can talk to Albert about one of the free radical oxidant things, journals that he was involved with this fraud case and what was going on with the editor, the reviewers, the author, and what kinds of so. So you think the science was tough, published, and my career almost came to a crashing halt because I didn't quite get that at the beginning. I had one in particular for my thesis, and I got one of these new letters at that point, new letters from the editor about it's not acceptable at this time if you know, and I misinterpreted that they didn't really want to see that again. When in reality they did. And I had left, I was doing my postdoc at McGill, I got into other things, and pretty soon I never got around to dealing with it, and I should. So you gotta, there are the steps, you know. First you gotta get pissed and unhappy. Then you gotta go back and say, what is the editor really saying to you? What are the reviewers really, and then you begin to plan what you're gonna do. And then start working on the response, and you're going to nail it. Gotta nail it. Because if you can get it back to the editor and it doesn't go out to the reviewers, that's good. I'd say that speeds it up for you, but it also improves your reputation as an author at that journal and with that editor.
Charlie, can I ask you what these are? What these things are?
What are those?
Yeah.
Well, that's the CIA.
Okay.
What we're doing is recording.
Oh, okay.
So we're using something called Zoom, which is something new in this space. I don't know anything about it, but we're doing a podcast, so we're picking up everybody's comments, and all the slides we'll post this.
So if anyone missed Dr. Pointer's or Dr. Tadgis's before, it's already on the website. So.
But it's much better if you come in person because then you can ask questions.
I think you need to, one, you have to get permission from the people who are participants to get their stuff published, whatever it's published, out of the public domain. I don't think you can just automatically assume that everybody's comments are something that they're going to allow that to happen.
Is everybody happy with their comments being on the public domain? Does anybody not want to have their comments on the public domain? Okay, so we'll have to have a sign.
Sign-in sheet, or somebody, you have to have a paper document that says that I give you.
Yeah, you sign.
Charlie, I recently did a survey on behalf of the CMB program in which I found that graduate students end up being co-authors on many-fold more papers than are in their dissertation. So I'd recommend, since there's a lot of students in the audience, to be involved in the rebuttal process, to take a look at the way that either your mentor or co-authors craft their rebuttal, because everyone's going to do it a little differently. It's going to be different depending on the manuscript, the tone of the review, and the more you can see of those, the more you'll learn from experience and then be able to develop your own style. That might be, again, situational, just like the different letters will be. So be involved in that process.
Yeah, I had a visiting professor once when I was out in Denver. Alan Webb, did you ever meet him? Oh boy, what a piece of work he was. his wife was a professor of journalism. And I was visiting him when I first met him, and he was sitting there reviewing a paper. And we're working on a review, rebuttal back. And he was explaining to me how he did it, how he, the first word he wanted in each of his responses was agreed, or something positive, so that the reviewer can then scan down through all your rebuttals to each point and see that in general, like 80, 90% of them are, yes, I agree, yes, yes, yes. Or, they say that there's an error here, change. Oh, change. Apologize, you screwed up. I'm so sorry, I missed that. We weren't clear. So yeah, learning the craft, it's kind of it took me a while to figure this out. And I think it's like reviewing grants, you can't write a good grant until you review and understand what the reviewer is. They want to like your paper, most of them, they agreed to look at it, they got a choice. The nice editor person sent them a request, usually being, oh, you're such an expert in the field, we'd like you to look. Oh, that made you feel good, right? And then they gave you an abstract and a list of authors. You look at the app, wow, that's kind of cool, I should know something about that, or I'm going to learn something, right? And then you read the paper, and the paper is like horrid. And then so then you get mad, and then you got to start writing a review. As a reviewer, I don't always point out everything. I'll say there are many instances in this manuscript where I can't understand what you're trying to tell me. And I'll give them a few examples, but I'll also say there's many more. And so any revision should, be careful about revising the whole thing. Because I just couldn't understand parts of it. And then I get the response back from the authors. They changed the 2 that I pointed out and left the 5 more that were in there.
I guess by extension then, in trying to interpret critiques, especially if you get a reject and it comes along with some criticism, that might not be the entirety of the criticism. So just addressing those in a revision to another journal may not be sufficient to make that an acceptable manuscript, even upon further revision. So you need to look at it.
You surely have made suggestions to the authors that they blew off, right?
Certainly.
And then how do you feel when you get that back?
Yeah. It depends. It really does.
See, Matt's a nice guy. Okay. We can pick another faculty member, Dr. Tope. You get back one that the authors have blown you off. How do you feel? What do you do?
It just depends. If it's something that's major and the major issue with the study, then you say no. If it's something that it's just sort of the study will still stand on its own and is decent, but they could have done this or maybe should have.
Yes.
I'm not gonna.
See, these 2 guys are pretty reasonable. What they realize, and it's happened to me where I write something and then when it gets back, I realize, oh, I was being unreasonable.
What's really tough is when you have a learned experience that you're trying to help them out by providing your input, yet they can cite a number of very crappy papers that have said something different, but your experience says that those papers aren't to be trusted. That's really tough. Yes, there's a literature that supports that, but the practical matter is that it's not true.
Yeah, so then I conclude I wasted a lot of energy, kinetic energy, trying to help them, and B, they're a bunch of knuckleheads. And next time I see a paper from that lab, I'll remember that. And then I'll get some back, and I get upset enough that I just write back to I've written this back to the editor. I stand by my original review. My concerns with the review are the same for the ones I identified previously. I do not find the authors have been responsive And so therefore, I'm not going to bother with re-reviewing this. And I strongly recommend it not be published. Now, they may go on, so like at the JP, for instance, you get 3 reviewers, if 2 of them like it, it gets published. Even so, I've been the 3rd reviewer on a number of occasions. Don't like the thing, don't think it should get published in its present form, and it's still get published. And yeah, that's the journal, they've decided that. That's why their impact factor is still below 5, but that's okay. It's that sort of stuff. And so you just do the best you can. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Stay tuned. I think we're going to get something fairly philosophical from Chris, and then we'll start up with rare matter ones as well. Have a great day.
Yeah. Make sure you take her down to the lab.
Sure.
We're gonna take them for Jake.
Well, okay, put it here. I'm gonna put 5 minutes into it. So. Okay.
Make sure it goes all right.
Oh, you stayed. Aaron.
I did. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to have a sign-in sheet. That says by signing in, you agree that.
You know, it's ridiculous. You go outside and you trip and fall on the sidewalk and you make an absolute fool of yourself and somebody records it. They're not going to get your permission, but it's going to go all over social media. So this whole legality of having to get it, I'm a little flabbergasted.
No, I just.
It protects us for sure, but it's also like what?
So I think actually it'd be better handled with a disclaimer slide.
Yeah, that's what I wrote down.
Who's this?
Just my postdoc mentor.
Yes, tell me that. Put mentor. Otherwise, I don't know who they are. I assume that's what it was, but.
You still have the microphone on you? I should walk off it and then exit the office.
Do you have the paper I can use?
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Just use it right.
Yeah. Charlie, are you good? Do you want your?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay.
Really thought about all these is if any of them are particularly prestigious. You have to be careful about that. Yeah, you just sort of, there were, I'll make this up, there were 5,000 people who applied and only 2 that were accepted, that kind of, it's something particularly. Okay. Sustainability faculty fellow, this one is a little weird. I've never even heard of that, and I'm here, so I don't know what that means. I like this. Short and concise to the point. This is a little too precise. Confused. This is all our teaching stuff. I just put current student or something. No, it's not a good idea to leave things. See, like this, all this. This is good. I mean, you've turned it red, and I don't know what that means. So what I've been telling people here is to put in not applicable if it's not applicable, or none to date. Informal teaching is not really applicable to what you do. And the faculty mentoring is none to date.
Yeah, because I don't have much. Yeah, usually I was delete.
Yeah, before you would delete it. We want you to keep it in there, and it just say none to date.
That means not to date.
None to date. So visiting professor supervised, none to date. Otherwise, I think you just forgot about it. Or it's better. It's like anything. You're filling in anything. You always put something in everything, even if it's just not applicable. NA. Do you know what NA is?
NA, yeah.
Yeah.
So did you suggest to use NA on which one?
It depends. So, for instance, informal teaching is not applicable. None today, none today, none today,
Okay,
none today. This is good. And now we've posted some examples of, to give you an example of some of this. We'll put up more as time goes on. And these are something you can, that's sort of a work in progress. Okay. A little unusual, but different. Make it easy for you. So we're going to do it. Our online one won't allow you to do that. One of the guys that trained with him, and he'll do it this way. He'd actually had his file cabinets by year, how many papers each. That was his whole focus, was numbers of papers. Just say none today, none today, none today. Abstracts.
It's about, I guess, means the conference. I have a lot. I did not.
Yeah, you have tons. I mean, how many papers do you have published? 30?
44.
44. So you probably have close to 100 abstracts.
Yeah, a lot. And yeah, because too long, I did not.
Well, I put them in there. At this stage of your career, I put them all in.
Okay.
But you certainly nowadays, I only put the ones, when I think about it, when I was still doing it, I was only putting the last couple of years. And then that didn't indicate it was only the last couple. Because those are the things that haven't gotten to publish. And so it gives me an idea of what you're currently working.
So here means I go to a conference, I have a poster presentation.
Yeah, you have a poster.
That's called abstract.
Yeah, different societies call it different things, but more commonly it's called an abstract. Okay, not too bad. You can also send it to Erin and she'll look at it too. Just a few things. Okay. Not too bad. Better than most of them. But that's all anybody ever spends time looking at your CV, what I just did. No one looks at it much. Some people will sit and ponder them extensively. Most people don't. They just cruise through it. Get a sense of what you're doing. And I didn't see any of the, do you have grants? You had grants.
I had some, but not much. No.
Yeah, but you don't have any of that, did you?
No, I did not.
Yeah, well, that you got to fix. You gotta put every grant you've ever had. And you also have to put in, for your case, I'd be putting in ones I've submitted,
Okay.
particularly if I get a score. Because there's absolutely nothing in there. I've got every grant I ever got. Don't have very many rejected, but I put in a few of those too. I used to, not anymore.
I guess everything on that. And everything recording.
No, those guys from the 80 guys.
Oh, really? Because there's no, okay, hang on, end meeting.